So this week, you will be, hopefully unsurprisingly, working on procedural texturing for your assignments. This is the wrong one. Hang on. Gotta find the doc. All right. So again, the procedural texturing assignment. I do have this weird thing here where I said like provided model and it's like read it out. I still need to make the provided model, which hopefully will be done in the next like day or two. Feel free to start your assignment without it if it's not done in time. I was pretty much gonna make a shader ball robot that kind of resembles a shader ball but in robot form. I thought it would be cute and you guys could pose it. So that's the bit about the provided model. But if you're not going to use that, or you get tired of waiting for me to make it, basically model and UV an object and then procedurally texture your object. Good examples of objects include fruit, which honestly would be like my personal nightmare. I'm partial to like stuff like axes or metal tools because it's easier. It's easy to think of stuff like, oh, like rust goes on metal, you know, scratches go on paint, maybe go on metal. You can also use like a fire hydrant. They're really fun for adding grime, stuff like that. And then if you're feeling like super crazy unfancy, you could use a shader ball. But that will get you like the minimum assignment grade for like model effort because shader balls are boring and ugly. So ideally, like do something fun and interesting. Again, I'm not really picky as long as it lets you get procedural texturing in. I would recommend doing something, so like if you look at the, that's my face. If you look at the shader ball that I was using, there are like certain features that I added in to sort of highlight areas of the texture. So I have like areas of really thin, look at the actual model. So there's like, in here there's like a really deep groove. There's some hard edges here, some softer edges, and then like lots of sort of hard concave areas down here. So there's like, you know, areas underneath where, so it's not just like a pyramid shape. So if you want to make your own shader ball and you just like Google shader balls, there's a bunch of different variations people have made, but most of them do share some certain common features, like at least showing a hard edge in case you want to do, you know, like the curvature stuff where you like chip paint away. But yeah. And if you, as usual, if you have questions about your shader balls or your objects or whatever, just shoot me an email before you start working. I usually check my emails a few times a day, so. Yeah. And then when you're doing your procedural textures, there's a few requirements. Basically use at least 3 different materials in your texture. So by that I mean, like for this one I had the gold texture, the paint texture, and the rust texture. So that would be an example of 3 different materials mapped to basically create this one crazy, spiky scratch nightmare. Does that make sense? Cool. And I would encourage, so like I just did this on like really basic, pretty much slider value stuff. I would encourage you to actually try and add some more detail and like nice, especially if you do like rust. There are some maps in there for that, so it looks like actual rust instead of just like awkward gray blobs, or like awkward rusty blobs. Because it's also gonna blend like your bump maps and stuff like that in. So if you put bump maps or anything, should show up pretty nicely. And then you can use texture maps for whatever you want. If you want to, again, like add, you know, a color and roughness for rust, or if you want to use a like scratch material, scratch texture to like put scratches in. Scratches are kind of hard to do procedurally, like proper like slashy scratches. So you guys are welcome to use texture maps for that stuff. But just make sure that like anywhere there's grime or like rust and like most of the detail from the shader should really come from the procedural generation. And that's pretty much the requirements of the assignment. Are there any questions on that? All right. And then model expectations, just, I don't know, you're aiming for something that looks like complex and has a lot of interesting layers and detail in it. And if anyone can find a way to do this in a way that makes sense without using grime, I will be impressed, but like probably you're all gonna have really dirty models. Alternately, you're gonna have like really awesome looking tilapia with like really awesome spice textures on top. Kind of, you know, I guess whatever makes sense for what you're doing. I'm actually not opposed to doing, if you want to do like weird food textures or something procedurally. Might be kind of interesting. Mostly just make sure that it looks nice and try to get it as realistic as possible. And then for what to submit, just the standard 3 to 4 renders of your object. And the only thing, so I would like to see, pick like one of your render angles from your finer render, and also render each individual material that you used. So like the chrome, rust, etc., just to see like how it stands on its own compared to the final texture. It'll also give me a better idea of like how you guys actually mapped your textures. So hey. But yeah, and just make sure they're all at the same render angle so the lighting is kind of similar between them. And then also submit like your textures, any textures you use, like file textures, your Maya file, and if you used any reference images, like you went out and find a really cool wall or something that you're gonna do, like throw those in as well. And then just make sure, so this is gonna be probably like one of the most interesting assignments to open for me personally in a Maya file. So if you guys could just make sure that like before you start working, you know, make a project, set your project, and select all of your images that you're using out of your source images folder. Because it is kind of difficult for me to like trace through sometimes and see exactly what you guys are doing in your shaders depending on what you're doing. And having everything hook up is going to make it easier if I need to troubleshoot your stuff. And then also if you could just do me a favor and like get rid of any weird, like if you have like 30 versions of your Maya file, I don't need all those. So please just like get rid of extra stuff like that or like Photoshop files, anything. But yeah, any questions on that? Cool. Like I said, I'll try to get like a little robot guy done if you want to use him. I mentioned something about like posing him with 1 or 2 simple props. By that I just mean like put him in a little alleyway or something like that. Maybe like throw a trash can in. You could make him sort of sad, slumped on the ground with like lots of rust on him, something like that. But yeah, that's pretty much the shtick for this. So does anybody have any, oh wait, sorry. I remember there's another assignment. All right. So the other thing you're gonna do for pre-production for your final, this is an individual assignment, which it says somewhere in here. But basically you're gonna make a digital floor plan of your workshop. I'm just going to delete that. So again, requirements for the space, at least 1 window and 1 door. And this is like, I consider this a soft requirement, but it should fit in a 10 by 12 area. Basically, the only reason that I think that's at all important, the final should look like a lived-in textured like space with stuff in it. It's going to be a lot easier to fill a smaller space than a larger space. So if you're doing like a giant, wide open like train station or something like that, it's going to be really hard to make that look full. So I don't really care if it's perfectly like 10 by 12 or what shape the room is, but just choose something that you feel like is realistic for you to be able to actually accomplish. I'm not expecting, you know, grand banquet halls. And then, in case you all wanted a flashback to CGI1, this assignment is basically just recreating that make your room to scale thing from the first week of that class. So it should basically just be like a rough layout of furniture pieces, and make sure you get accurate dimensions from people about like what size their stuff is. Because again, all of this stuff should be to scale. So like furniture, objects, etc. And if you guys need to do like hand-drawn floor plans to help yourself sort of like get orientated, is that a word? Get oriented with what you're doing, that's fine, but I do expect a 3D model for stuff. And let's see. Again, not a team assignment. I don't care if your space is square. If you want to do like a gazebo or like a weirdly shaped room, totally fine. Also, it's always interesting if you guys put stuff like, you know, slanted roofs or like other interesting architectural details like arches or whatever in the space. It just makes it feel a little bit, I guess, more interesting, more creative. Certainly not a requirement, but like something to consider. And then if you guys could just render out your room, it doesn't need to be like a super pretty render. It's mostly like a functional thing that you're doing this week. It's gonna be a render of your room, and then copy the render, and then if you could just throw in some measurements, like if you have a bed or something that's like 4 by 3 feet, just like go into Photoshop, draw little lines along the edges of the bed, and be like 4 feet, 3 feet. That's all I need. It doesn't need to be like super insanely fancy. I don't need every measurement down to like the millimeter. Just get like the measurements of some of the basic stuff. And that's pretty much the assignment for this week. Any questions on that? All right. And then just zip me like your Maya scene with the space, rendered image with labels, and if you happen to have any concept sketches, throw those in as well. And in case anyone was wondering, the only real reason that this is required to be